Psychedelics today. This is Solidarity Fridays, I guess. And Kyle and I are here. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, Joe. Yeah, who came up with that name?
I don't know.
Rob,
maybe it was me
Marissa?
late at night. I think I was just typing late at night. Okay, what do we do? Well, I guess we need solidarity right now. So why not? Number of fun historical references there. So here we are, Friday edition of Psychedelics today. And I guess before we dig in too much, just a quick shout out to our sponsors, Audible, amazing books over there. The Mescaline book by Mike J, High Weirdness by Eric Davis, Terrence McKenna's Invisible Landscape, I think, is over there too, and a number of Leary books. So go get a free trial, audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. And you could use the code psychedelics today and get a free month trial and a free audiobook. No risk. Try it out. Definitely worth your time. Taking a walk and listening to an audiobook is one of my favorite things to do. So check it out.
I've actually switched over to audiobooks versus podcasts recently.
There's a thing I read a while ago. It sucks to say it on the show, but it's like, people really need to be spending more time with books to really get deeper into certain subject areas. And this is the way I've been able to really do that. And it's interesting. Thankfully, our show isn't like, listen to this episode and then build your email list. It's like, well, have these nice ponderous topics to explore. So thankfully it's different. It's not like, okay, no, go figure out Facebook ads. It's like, no, you just got to think about this. No, think about it. So yeah, audiobooks are amazing, and go check it out. audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. Also brought to you by Onnit, ONNIT. And you can use the code over there, PSY today for 10% off. I've used a lot of their food and supplement products for a while. They got really awesome stuff. I love their coffee. I love some of their other drinks like chai mixes, and definitely an amazing company. I think a lot of their supplement ingredients are earth grown, so they're not lab made, which may or may not appeal to you. I like it. I've used a number of their mushroom products, and yeah, definitely worth checking out. So it's Onnit, ONNIT.com. Use the code PSY today at checkout for 10% off of everything but fitness products. And I guess thirdly, navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. Kyle and I are putting together 2 different editions of this 8-week program where we meet once a week to go over a lot of the pre-recorded assigned material that we've put together, and we can unpack that together over the course of 8 weeks. And it's a substantial curriculum. And if you've got a little bit of free time right now, maybe this is where you want to spend it. Anything you want to mention about the class, Kyle?
Yeah, I guess I would just clarify. Same edition course, just 2 different class times. So hitting up East Coast and trying to also hit London time for those in Europe and the UK. Yeah, awesome. We're almost sold out, actually, for our evening Eastern time, so 7 p.m. I think that's group 2. And so if you're listening to this and want to sign up, definitely go over to psychedeliceducationcenter.com to check that out. I'm super pumped about it, as always. And yeah, it's just a really great mix of hybrid. So a lot of online pre-recorded material, and then meet up for an hour and a half on Zoom to chat about the material. So it's a really great way to learn and dig in. So if you've been wanting to, deepen your psychedelic education, definitely join us. And that starts Thursday, May 7th. At 2 p.m. Eastern time is group 1, and then group 2 is 7 p.m. Eastern time.
If you're not sure it's right for you, hit us up, email us psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com, and we can set up a time to chat to see if it's a good fit for you. So I hope to see you in there. And all right, let's get rolling. So this recent Johns Hopkins study got a little bit of press. The title of the blog post I saw was "A Single High Dose of Psilocybin Alters Brain Function Up to 1 month Later," published April 7 by Eric Dolan on scipost.org. Interesting study. It's a small study. Only 12 people were in it, so it's kind of like a pilot of sorts. From what we've learned lately, you need about 50 people to really be able to speak to something really well scientifically. So 12 is a start, and it looks like they're going to try to get a larger trial going. But yeah, any kind of interesting points on this article, Kyle, for you?
Yeah, so I guess I'll read a little section that popped out. It said, Let's see. The researchers found that the self-reported emotional distress was reduced 1 week after psilocybin administration, but returned to baseline levels at 1 month after the psilocybin administration. And Barrett and his colleagues also observed decreases in amygdala responses to emotional information 1 week after psilocybin, but also returned to normal 1 month post psilocybin. So, I mean, that's just really interesting to see that it has, I mean, even a week long reduction in, say, amygdala activity. I think that's really fascinating that like a dose of psilocybin could actually, prolong that even just for a week. When I think about drugs, it's like, what type of effect does it have on the body once it metabolizes and then you're back to baseline? But, yeah, again, relatively small sample size. But I mean, thinking that it could have that type of impact on the brain for almost a month, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, another line here. A single high dose of psilocybin administered to a properly screened individual in a carefully controlled setting can have lasting positive effects on emotional functioning in healthy individuals. These effects were reflected in transient changes in the function of brain regions that support emotional processing. So that's from Barrett, one of the authors of the paper. Authors of the paper, Frederick Barrett, Manoj Kaus, Nathan D. Sepeda we've had him on the show once or twice maybe, and James Picard and Roland Griffiths. So pretty awesome set of folks there. I wanted to find the dosages. 25 milligrams per 70 kilograms was the dosing. I really don't have a good grasp on what that looks like in terms of translating to dried mushrooms. But yeah, it's interesting. Some studies don't account for body weight and some do, which is a really interesting thing. I don't know. Hopefully we get a little more standardized eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This study actually kind of reminded me of a recent article that was put out maybe a month or two ago about ketamine, and just saying how traditional classical psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD seem to have a longer benefit versus ketamine, which is a little shorter duration for depression. I think they were measuring
the
depression.
phrasing on that wasn't fair. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was rat model, right? And they're trying to measure depression in rats. And I don't know, how do you measure that? I mean, I guess coming from the neuroscience, you're measuring maybe like blood flow in the brain and how the brain's affected. But I mean, that seems like a very
I think my critique was cost.
Thing.
It's like ketamine is, I think, always going to be a cheaper drug to administer in a psychotherapeutic framework than psilocybin. It's shorter acting. You can do psycholytic or psychedelic work with it. Super safe. It's currently available, whereas the other drugs are not currently available in the legal pharmacopoeia. And yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Like, we get great results from ketamine. Like, people are getting great results from ketamine and long lasting if you do it right. And I think this is just like, throw the drugs in the trough and see what happens kind of thing. It's like, I did take their point though. Like, I do think if money's not an object, which it is for some folks and isn't for others, and of course you want to do a tryptamine based course of therapies, or it just seems logical at this point, depending on the results you want.
Right.
But not everybody's a great candidate for mushrooms either, right? Ketamine's probably safer for more people than psilocybin is.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting article, though. And I liked how it was getting a lot of press and shared around a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think some people took it as negative. I mean, it was just an interesting article, but yeah, I think we have to really view these as tools and how are we using it in context, right? Like, that doesn't necessarily mean that ketamine's bad and psilocybin's superior, right? I mean, ketamine's probably works wonderful for some people that, psilocybin would not work that great for. And so, we got to take into all these variables into consideration when thinking about what could be potentially right down the line for clinical treatment.
Right. And this whole concept of my drug's better than your drug thing, or I only want homegrown mushrooms, great, cool. But we need more drugs. We don't have enough drugs yet. We kind of need another 50 Sasha Shulgins to do another couple 20-year projects to develop hundreds more compounds that we don't even know about yet that could be even more helpful for a lot of the problems we're facing. getting those drugs into the market is a whole nother thing. But,
Yeah.
I would almost hope an organization like MindMed would see that opportunity and go, okay, like we can actually be like a normal pharma company here, but do like the Sasha Shulgin protocol somehow. I don't know if you can do that legally as a company, but
Mhm.
I bet somebody has legal creativity to figure that out. I'm
Maybe
sure.
one day.
Yeah, totally. Like there's those really interesting projects that happen in the ocean, like the Seasteading Institute. It's kind of like a really kind of weird libertarian dystopia or utopia, depending on how you look at it. Like make the laws to attract the people, and then you can come live on this little island and do stuff that's not necessarily legal elsewhere, like psychedelic research or experimental surgeries that people might want to pay for or something. So very interesting stuff. And hopefully somebody takes advantage of that eventually regarding psychedelics. We'll see. Yeah, cool. I don't really have too much else in this Hopkins one. You want to move over to that Mary Jane one?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So Mary Jane came out with this post the other day, and it's like our most popular Instagram post in a long time. So the title of the article is Doctor Calls for Temporary Approval of Psychedelics to Treat COVID-19 Trauma. Doctor's name is Dr. Morgan Campbell. He called on the FDA to grant emergency approvals for drugs like MDMA, LSD, and psilocybin to treat mental and emotional trauma caused by the corona pandemic. So you saw a comment down there where a doctor didn't understand how this was relevant at all. He almost like didn't understand that there was psychotraumas happening.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? Like, can you remember kind of what he was saying?
I think there were a few people just how trying to push psychedelics to treat trauma like this quick due to the pandemic, like devaluates, these as psychiatric tools. And I think there were a few people of like, what trauma? And I'm thinking about all the little nuances and kind of almost how some of this stuff is starting to hit home here for me. I mean, first of all, let's think about the first line folks, the people that are in the hospitals, first responders, and people that are dealing with this and that are just so emotionally exhausted, burnt out, like working like, so many hours, not having the right protective gear. And just thinking about their mental health, like what type of vicarious trauma are they going to be carrying from this, right? Just being like, I mean, that's got to be pretty overwhelming in some of these hospitals where they're just maxed out. Multiple people are dying. What was New York City yesterday in the past like 24 hours? I think had like 700 something deaths. New Jersey, I think was, I forget, under 300 in one day. And so right there, like what is the mental health long-term effects going to be for first line responders that are working at this? What about the people that are dying, that are grieving? So a friend of mine and just died, and not from COVID, but from something else. And I was talking to a couple friends, and they're like, this is like really messed up because we can't even get together to properly grieve. So just thinking about the people that are then dying in isolation, people that are dying from this disease, and other just dying in general that can't come together for proper burial and grief ceremonies, and how is holding that grief inside really going to impact us long term. I always kind of come back to the work of Martine Practel. He's got a really great book called The Smell of Rain on Dust, all about grief and praise, but just talking about how like grief slowly eats at us, whether we know it or not, and how a lot of us don't even properly grieve when people kind of go through traumas or when people die. As a culture, we tend to hold it in. And so what are we holding in now when we can't even get together for funerals and properly like maybe celebrate somebody's life because everybody is quarantined in isolation? And here in New Jersey, I don't know about other states, I'm guessing New York, New Jersey, and places where it's getting hit hard, no social gatherings like funerals and whatnot. I mean, there's so many little nuances on how this pandemic is really going to affect people long term. So I'm thinking like, what are the long-term effects of this pandemic and how it's going to influence mental health? Even like that question, when's it safe to go outside? can we handshake again? I was just talking to somebody and they're like, I think I'm just going to like eliminate the handshake for months. It's only going to be elbow bumps. And even just kind of that like fear thinking, because we're dealing with a virus that's invincible, right? And we don't know when it's going to come and go, if it's totally eradicated, if it's just kind of hanging out, waiting for, a new up flare. And so how is that really going to impact people? What about the people that are in isolation, that live in cities, that are just isolated in apartments, that live by themselves, not having much social contact besides like online and Zoom? I just came across an article about Zoom exhaustion. That's real. I mean, sometimes I get totally exhausted just being on the computer all day, and I really have to just like turn things off and just try to take care of myself in a different way, even though it's really enticing to want to join a lot of these Zoom meetups. Like, I don't think I've actually really attended many because I'm just like, I don't want to be next to the computer. I'd rather, but I also am fortunate. I have a backyard I can go into, and I've been working on a garden. But what about people that, live in cities that, they're kind of just trapped in their apartments? Thinking about people that are, drug users that might use this time to relapse, people that are struggling with like severe depression and suicidal thinking with this isolation. Like, what type of mental health like impact is that going to have on them? How is it going to exacerbate things? So there's all these little nuances here about how this pandemic could be traumatizing for people. Thinking about just the vicarious trauma right there of like watching people die every day. I mean, if you tune into the news and, that fear is inside of you going, what are we living through right now, right? I mean, obviously humans have been through this with like wars and watching people die. I mean, obviously some countries have had it a hell of a lot worse, right? But, we also got to take into consider that. And, and then somebody was even kind of asking, well, what is trauma, right? I don't think we should be pushing these treatments just for trauma. Like, I think we should reserve it for PTSD, and how just calling anything a trauma disorder kind of devaluates diagnosis of PTSD. Yeah. And, some people are pretty functional, right? But I'm thinking like about how it would be great to have some of these tools available when this settles. And I'm not saying we need to start treating people now. I mean, we've gone over the risks of possibly using psychedelics during this time, of tapping into the collective unconscious, dealing with some of that collective trauma. I mean, it might not be the best time to actually use these substances, but long term, like when this starts to settle and people may still kind of be a little bit traumatized, and thinking about these vulnerable populations of people that like are grieving. I just saw another article, 2 parents just died, and I just had my dad's ex coworker, his wife just died, and now he's got COVID. And, it's pretty, how is that really going to play a role? And then families, right? It's like 2 of your parents just died from COVID, and now maybe you're like all alone as a single kid all of a sudden, right? Like, there's like all these long-term things I've been thinking about. So, yes, this is a physical issue as well of, physical health, but also long-term mental health. I think, we're going to be in a mental health. I mean, we're already in a mental health crisis, and how is this exacerbating it? Those are some of my thoughts when I read the article, and then started to engage with people on Instagram about this.
I read, so I didn't add this to the list yet, but this website, jewishjournal.com, came out with an article citing Grof. That's how it got on my radar. And it talked about how this time kind of looks a lot like a global ego death. So all the normal foundations we thought we had are no longer there in a lot of ways. Like, healthcare in the world is not as great as we thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
We thought people in government were taking precautions to keep us safe from pandemics. Apparently they're not to the level that we wish they were. So, the financial system's fragile. We have a pandemic, and, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase, came out yesterday with very dire predictions for economic circumstances globally. So, all these things coming down the pipe at once because of a single virus. What happens if we get hit with 3 viruses at once? In 20 years, hopefully we have time to recover. But, what does that look like? Hopefully we're able to develop vaccines in a month, but odds are real low on that.
I don't know if I'd want to
So
take a vaccine if it was developed in a month, though. It's like
right,
thinking about like
right,
safety.
right, right,
Yeah.
totally. Because they did try to rush vaccines in the past, and it did not go well.
Yeah.
I think like some of the swine flu or bird flu stuff was like really rushed, and it wasn't as safe as people wanted it to be.
Hmm.
So totally, yeah. Like, but what do we do? I don't know. Like perhaps
Right.
everybody wears
Yeah.
masks. We turn into Hong Kong or Japan, like Tokyo, and everybody's a germaphobe all the time, which would help, but it's still not perfect.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of fear, a lot of trauma, a lot of doubt. Like like for you and I, for instance, like to get it personally, like when can we host breathwork again?
Hmm.
Like when is it safe? Like I've got this June workshop on the books, but I'm like every day going, I don't know. Like is June far enough away? And the answer is maybe. Like I think we'll hit peak by then. And like I hope we hit peak by end of April, but
Hmm.
it's hard to say, given the way this thing's operating and how poorly we're handling everything.
I
Like
think looking at
I'm
Wuhan might be a good example. I mean, they've pretty much like are out of their lockdown and people are flooding the streets. Will it come back there again? If yes, hey,
it
maybe
has.
we
It
have to,
has.
yeah, maybe we have to really think about like longer term type of behaviors. I don't know. It's, yeah.
Right. So yeah, what is responsible here and what is safe and how do we deal with all this? There's so much uncertainty. Like I think for a lot of people, this is kind of the most uncertain period of their lives to date.
Hmm.
Like I
Totally.
think we're like it's pretty clear that it looks like we're going to enter the second Great Depression,
Hmm.
if we haven't already entered it, along with a ton of deaths. I just kind of realized the correlation between like the flu of 1918 or the Spanish flu, and then like the Great Depression really only being like a handful of years after. So, what was there a relationship there? Perhaps, yeah. So like, what do we do, and how do we plan our lives even? Like, I don't know
Hmm.
when I'm going to get to see my family again, which is really kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Living all the way across the country from them has its perks and it has its negatives.
Yeah.
And this is one of them, right? Like I'm sure within 12 months I'll get to see my family again, but you know, hard saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, this shit is traumatic. Like any doctor saying this is not traumatic is not a really great doctor. I don't think they graduated very high in their class. Or at least they dismissed psychology and psychiatry entirely, which I'm sure there's plenty of doctors that do that, but please don't do that, doctors. It's an important field, important couple fields there.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering too if it's like, oh, why are we using what's happening as an excuse to try to speed up the legitimate science and research, and we should stick with that and not try to speed it up. But I think about tools and mental health, and yeah, I get it. We have to really push through and get through the FDA protocols and research, but I mean, I think we also need to start looking outside the box as well and thinking like of other options because this stuff's real. It's happening. And, what would like where would we have been if we had tools like this implemented in society when other traumas were going on? And then,
Mhm.
if we start getting into epigenetics and adverse childhood events and just knowing how, traumas get passed down and how that influences health and behaviors, like, what if we can get ahead of it this time since we have these tools, we have the information, we have the technology to really start trying to help treat some of this stuff so it's not a cycle, right? I mean, before, without, the tools and technology and knowing what we know makes sense. We're all trying our best. But if we have it, how do we really kind of start implementing that? And yeah, I always think about like those long-term effects, looking at epigenetics and ancestral traumas and how could this ripple down. It's interesting. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The why is interesting. Like my regular point is that the safety of MDMA and LSD and psilocybin is very well established. There's probably a number of other drugs that have an extreme amount of research on them, but aren't yet approved for prescription purposes.
mhm.
Like what other drugs were researched for decades and then made illegal to research and had oodles of papers published against them.
Mhm.
And so we have like, decades of safety data essentially. And that's something that Rick brought up It's like MDMA was kind of an easy pick for us because there was so much research done that we didn't have to pay for to show safety. So it was like kind of an economical thing. And yeah, like revisioning, like we talked about a while ago, the whole FDA kind of like approval process being a response to the thalidomide drug. It's kind of like a birth control drug, I think, causing deformations en masse on babies. And like it was a good response at the time, but perhaps like we can do better. Perhaps we can speed this thing a little bit better than we are now.
I think for new drugs, great. But yeah, as you're saying, some of this stuff has been researched and there's tons of safety data already in a sense. So for something like this, why couldn't we speed it up if we are starting to really try to get ahead of a mental health crisis that could really unfold, that is unfolding, right? Not that when it's going to, I mean, it is unfolding. So yeah, but coming back to like a vaccine, like, hey, I'm thankful like they might have to go through all those research protocols, right? I don't want people just injecting random stuff into me, right? Not knowing if it's safe or giving me some random medication that's not safe. But I mean, with psychedelics, there's a long history of use. And I mean, coming from the plant medicine world, shamanic culture, obviously, and then, what research we do know with LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin from science. So,
yeah. So I think we do have to be patient, but I like the sentiment of that one doctor. And I think the interesting thing too is this thing got so much press, but it was a single doctor that made this happen. So if any other doctors feel like coming out and saying stuff like that, go for it. Like the safety profile is there. Like this is clearly safer than most drugs on the market. That, especially if we look at psychiatric meds, like these drugs are way safer and way better in a lot of senses than standard psychiatric medication, which they're great tools too. Like, don't get me wrong. I think we need all the tools in the toolkit, but yeah, like these drugs relative to those drugs, like the amount of benefit we could get dollar for dollar, or like decreasing human suffering. If we want to have some sort of human suffering unit, like the human suffering units would be, really dropped.
Yeah.
If we were able to do these MDMA protocols.
Yeah. And I guess to play my own devil's advocate, like, okay, what could be the downside of that? Maybe a bunch of people have access to this that aren't properly trained and, actually exacerbate trauma. And maybe and just this idea of, oh, we have these tools and now we should try to give it out to everybody to try and heal their trauma that they went through. And obviously that's not going to work. And yeah, so sometimes this is a long road. Proper training, really establishing these protocols, and not wanting to just give it out to anybody and everybody and kind of treating it as that new soma is like, oh, we've been through this. Now let's just take a pill to feel better, right? So really, being cautious with it is really important. But I'm thinking about for those that are really struggling, and if we could really kind of get maybe expanded access going quicker, right? And get some people trained up to be able to offer this type of treatment for people that are really struggling during this time and afterwards. So
maybe to go further, MAPS just yesterday announced that they're suspending all their sessions, all their research for a while until we're safe again, until it's safe enough for them to continue. So we are seeing real delays in the research. So, that is frustrating for a lot of us who are kind of true believers, but it's also, like there are some risks if we just decide to go for it. Yeah. Any doctor can just throw LSD into your mouth. It's like, well, I know a lot of doctors, 99% of them, I wouldn't want to have them feed me LSD and watch me.
No.
If I want to put it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be frustrating. We just got to sit tight. And like, if you want to see research go faster, start throwing money at research or figuring out if you can volunteer and help them. There's a lot of organizations that will need help, volunteer help, especially. And if you've got some free time, like maybe you want to donate time to Hopkins or MAPS or something, who knows, but reach out. And I'm sure groups need help. So in my mind, as we were talking about this, it kind of bled into this next topic of kind of psychedelics and money that we're seeing. What happens if the laws got really relaxed? Would sharks just kind of like come in and snag up new patents and protocols and whatnot? Like, or would they really abuse the ecosystem?
Right.
And what does abuse even look like in the ecosystem? Like, so right now, I don't want to be super critical of it, but I just want to kind of point it out that groups with money can come to the market, with some sort of very large conference and to somewhat establish themselves as instant experts. Now I have authority because I hosted this conference with Dennis McKenna and whoever else. It's like, well, cool. But what the hell? Like, it's kind of unintelligible in a sense to me to say, like, who is this doctor? Like, I've never heard of you. And I've been paying very close attention for a while. And you're, with these 3 CEOs doing XYZ, and now you're running this big conference and, who knows where. It's like, yes, we need more conferences and we need more media out there. Great. Like, I'm thankful for it on one hand, but I'm also like, what is actually happening? And what does this look like 3 years out?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a weird dichotomy, right? Because we have quote unquote psychedelic culture. I don't want to call it a psychedelic community, but we've got this whole like kind of mess of things happening in psychedelic culture. And newcomers are saying, oh, look, investment opportunity. Let's just throw money at it. And it kind of like really changes the dynamic of what we maybe expected to happen in the market and in the space. And it's kind of awkward. So like people with money can just be experts or
Yeah.
or whatever it is, right? Like it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know exactly what to say about it because, we need people with money to move drugs through the FDA protocols. If people agree that drugs should be moved through the FDA, that requires a shitload of money.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a weird spot to be in. Developing new drugs, like I was talking about, the Shulgin protocol would really require a lot of money too. So, what do we do? Do we just sit back and go, okay, 2CB, LSD, what are all these drugs? They're good enough. It's like, well, I don't know. And their legal status is good enough. No, I don't think so. But I don't know. What do you have to say about this? Like, it's complicated, obviously.
It's very complicated. And I think it's like what would happen if we stayed in the underground? I sometimes like the idea that it's like kind of comfortable and thinking about all the people that are doing that. Maybe they don't actually get shown, like they don't get to come out into the light and really, because that kind of puts them at risk. But then you have somebody that comes in with a lot of money and they have no expertise in this whatsoever. And then all of a sudden their authority and establishing stuff. And then you see these people that have been doing it for a while that have a lot to say kind of just get pushed under the rug. And I don't know, it seems really shitty at times, right? Like I'm just thinking about all the researchers and everybody that's really contributed to psychedelic research and maybe not getting recognition, or maybe their stuff kind of gets pushed under the rug. And then you just see some of these other players come in because they have money. They're able to establish a team. They're able to just funnel money at marketing and creating websites and really kind of creating their brand and getting their stuff out there. And it looks really fancy and looks really, oh, this person knows what they're doing. And then all of a sudden, just kind of wipes away really like authentic people with integrity that really understand this work versus people that just have influence over with their money and dollars. But on the flip side, as you're saying, I mean, it takes a lot of money. Like, look how much money MAPS has like had to raise over the years to even get to where they're at, and to be able to do all this research, to be able to do all this, we need money and we need people that have money to invest in these research projects. So it's this like delicate balance, I think, and I think it kind of comes back to finding people with integrity. And, I asked this when we were talking to Bia of like how to approach this. If you are in the psychedelic, culture and you're getting approached by people to participate. And I think it really comes down to like vetting. And it's a weird thing because there's sometimes you want to have an influence and voice within whatever they're doing. But at the same time, it's like, who do you associate with? How do you, are they just going to use you? And then, so it's this weird thing about integrity and who do you align with? How are you associating with different companies and different people? And it's complex. I don't know if I have any answers to it because, we see the benefit of the both sides and we realize that, hey, if we really want to get these medicines out there, we do need a lot of money funding this, right? I'm just even thinking about all the cool things we could do if we had a lot of money coming in. It's like, oh, this would be really wonderful. We could hire like a marketing team. We could hire all this stuff to actually get our stuff out there more.
And new classes and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
it could really move the needle, I think. But yeah, it's, we have, to be very transparent, we have been approached to talk to people. We've been really hesitant because I don't know enough about that stuff. We don't know enough about that stuff to know if it's really what we want. So, maintaining our control to like execute, I guess, more on our vision is kind of like the big thing. It's like, cool, yeah, getting a couple million would be sweet. But if we can't execute on our vision, like, what have we been doing the last 4 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, how do we stay with integrity and keep our vision and understand ethics in the space? Like the ethics in this space are wild. Like there's, it's an unbelievably complex landscape. And, perhaps what's happening is people with money just go, okay, this looks good. Like, I think the spreadsheet looks nice, but they're kind of tone deaf to everything that's happening around it. It's like, yeah, sweet. You're going to open up a global network of places to go trip. And you just started up last week. Like, cool. Like, what kind of connections do you have in the space? Like, what's your background actually? Did you just read like Michael Pollan and now you're ready to go? Or have you been putting in the work to really get it, to have your own, do your own inner work? I think that's a better phrasing, by the way, than have you tripped? It's like, no, are you doing your own inner work?
Tripping and inner work, I think, are completely different at times, right? You can trip and have good time, but tripping and doing your own inner work and going inside and really asking these complex questions and asking yourself motives and this and that, I think that's really important. Yeah, and I always wonder this, especially like with a lot of the transition from the cannabis space. There's an article on here. Psychedelic Investor magazine launches during virtual psychedelic global conference. What they're talking about,
Jesus.
like the founder of a cannabis investor magazine, now turning into a psychedelic investor magazine by microdose to cater to this growing market. And it's like, I don't know. It's this weird thing of like, do any of these people have experience? Are they just jumping on the bandwagon because of what the research is saying? Like, do they understand the little nuances and complexities with these state of consciousness? I mean, my fear sometimes when, I just see people say, oh, we're just going to do this, and just try to get it to everybody is like what we're kind of seeing now, right? Like how destabilizing the pandemic is what it's doing to everybody in a sense. Psychedelics on a mass scale, like what type of spiritual emergence process is really going to unfold if like we just think this is like the next best thing? And I don't know, I always kind of come back to like that like Robert Forte's comment about the soma too, right? These are very, very, very powerful substances at times. And I always really think about approaching it with respect and just kind of throwing it out there, being like, this is where the money's at and this is going to revolutionize things and let's just do this. And I think about sometimes existentially, what are we doing to people at times, right? I mean, sometimes you can really activate existential crises and, on a mass scale, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, it's a big deal. Makes me kind of think about like my kind of the thing that precipitated my dark night of the soul kind of thing, which, it can be a really important, informative thing for folks. And that's kind of, how many of those do we really want to trigger globally at once? It's already pretty dark right now, but do you really want to go full tilt right to that gauntlet that is, really, really dark? I don't think so. I don't think we want to do that right now. I don't think we want to do that en masse, even in the next 2 years, really. Though I do think it can be helpful if someone's really going at personal development.
Yeah, for sure.
And self-exploration, but it's, shit's not easy. It's not pleasant necessarily. And, I've fucking drove to the brink of madness a couple times, I think. And it wasn't even really drugs, Yeah. It's like breath work and just me trying to live my life in the way I thought I was supposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated, but these are things we need to look at. And like, what are we really doing? What are the downstream implications? And that's where perhaps non-classical psychedelics come in, like atypical psychedelics like ketamine come in, where, there's some self-development stuff there, but it's probably not going to precipitate the same sort of crisis that mushrooms or LSD would, or ayahuasca even. So, these differences are worth looking at. And, not all drugs are created equal. Huge diversity here. Yeah. So this is something that I believe the psychedelic world is going to be dealing with. The psychedelics and money topic is we're going to be dealing with it. It's going to be in our face for the next 10 years. And it might get weird.
I think it's going to get super weird.
Like CEOs of these big companies, maybe only having one mushroom trip. It's like, what on earth are you doing? Like, is this really the right move for you? But that said, like, look at it a little differently. Like this mind med thing with the 18MC, like, of course you don't need to have had an 18MC experience to find that drug useful for opiate addicts. Like in a world where Suboxone and prescription morphine are like really the rage. It's like, well, there's a lot less money in actually fixing addicts. Oh, not fixing, I don't know, addressing their substance use disorder than just keeping them on a maintenance drug. There's a lot less money to be made treating them with something like 18MC. So, these things are just not easy. It's not simple. And we really need to figure out how to balance these equations. Like, yes, there's issues in our society around money. Like, absolutely, no doubt. But it doesn't mean that we should necessarily fight companies trying to get these things into our modern pharmacopoeia. I don't know how to really balance it personally, though I'm thankful somebody's doing the hard work that I'm not able to do. And certainly wouldn't really even want to do. Like, I don't want to be a researcher in that way, where I'm doing like very carefully controlled studies. It's like, no, but there's people that love that shit. There's people that love running a business. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's enough on that topic.
Yeah. It's such a complex topic. And I think like the one thing I wanted to, I guess, just mention was with my critique, I really think about the container and what type of containers could these like people with big like businesses create, and I always come back to like shamanic culture, shamanic use and the container and the ritual. And, if we're just doing things at scale and just trying to get people in because we think it's like the next best thing. And, we're just going to dose people out all the time. Like, I don't know. I just always come back to that container and, accessibility and thinking about maybe those personal rights that people create that are actually really healing versus maybe needing to spend like tens of thousands of dollars for treatment. Because I mean, we don't know what some of these treatment models are going to look like down the line. And, who's really benefiting? The people that actually need it or the people that are just kind of putting the treatment in place? And I think those are things that we have to consider as well with a lot of money coming in, people investing. Yeah. And I mean, we talk about this all the time, accessibility. The people that probably really need it won't have access to it. And maybe the people that are thinking about making like a big business out of it, maybe they are kind of keeping that high ticket price and thinking about like, oh, there's plenty of people in there that want to do self-development work and we can charge that high ticket price, which is great for some people. But I always kind of come back to like the accessibility and part of it as well.
Accessibility is such a tricky topic, right? Like there needs to be a lot of work on that. And I don't have a good answer, but it's like people with money, Shaquille O'Neal, for instance, if he had PTSD, he would probably find the best person he could to do this stuff if he thought it was a good idea for him. But people without much money, without much, freedom and flexibility because of having money, they're essentially trapped. Like they're in a legal situation. Is it the company's fault or is it prohibition's fault? Right. Or is it something bigger? And yes, accessibility is a big deal, but if you want to make something really cheap, is it going to be good? Like if you're, as a facilitator, are going to only make, $75 for 12 hours and you've got a shitload of training, do you even want to do that?
Right.
Or would you rather spend time with your family? So, it's like a social worker kind of problem. Social workers really get their asses kicked, but they do amazing work.
Yeah.
and they're going above and beyond. Like maybe this fits in that realm. I don't know exactly, but it's going to take a really special person to want to do this regularly for very little money, especially given the risks and all sorts of stuff. I know that there's folks out there that have been doing it for free for years, but are they doing as well as somebody in the Hopkins study or somebody that's been very well trained with decades of experience?
Right.
Probably not, honestly. They might think so, but probably not. Don't get mad at me for saying that, but there's something to really think about. Just simmer on that.
It's complex. It's
Right.
complex, and I don't know. I always come back with like more questions and answers at times when I'm exploring this, and just, I don't really know what the right thing is at times because it's developing so quickly, and every day sometimes I feel like things are shifting, and then I'm shifting my view around how things are operating, and just really kind of have to keep asking questions about what's going on.
Perhaps that's the most important thing we can do.
Yeah.
And if somebody's trying to sell you a simple answer, like pump the brakes, like think for yourself about these issues and say like, oh, maybe that's not true. Like, what if I flip on these other, reality tunnel goggles, see it from a different angle,
Like I've definitely probably contradicted myself a few times throughout the course of the years talking about
Totally.
psychedelics. And it's like, I don't know, everything's just changing so quickly. I got to like actually sit and think about how things are going and think about all the possible different outcomes and different sides. And it's like, yeah, it's really complex.
Right. And interesting thing for us is that, our lineage, like our Grof lineage is LSD and breathwork. And there's so many other drugs and psychedelic substances. Maybe like I've been getting yelled at here and there for calling things that I think are drugs, like ayahuasca could be considered a psychedelic drug from a different framework. It's also a sacred medicine. I don't necessarily like calling it a medicine. I feel like that's philosophically tricky, but it's just that term medicine I feel is like goofy to me.
Well, I think that kind of comes back to like cosmology at times, right? Like, I think I've mentioned this a few times. One of my friends from Peru from high school, I was asking her about ayahuasca. I don't think she ever drank it. It was really kind of part of her culture, but, she knew about the folks in the jungle. And when I asked her about it, she's like, oh, I don't know. People get sick and they just go drink medicine. And from that perspective, it is medicine. They're not thinking about like the psychedelic effect, where I think that is like when we're thinking about that, we view that as a drug. It's altering our senses. And from their cosmology, I mean, interacting with spirits, that might be a day-to-day thing in a sense. And maybe it's not having that psychedelic influence where they go, oh, this is just medicine. We're just going to go heal ourselves in a sense. So sometimes I think it comes back from how are you viewing your worldview at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess maybe the direction I wanted to go in initially was who should be talking about ayahuasca in general. Like I make a deliberate point of not really speaking to that culture and that world too much. Like I had one experience. It's an amazing thing, but it's, not necessarily my thing. So, people in our kind of, situation, white guys, like, should we really be the main people chatting about ayahuasca? And I kind of on purpose have backed off on, stuff with really big indigenous use, like that ancient use, I guess. I think mushrooms, they've been in the culture so hard since the 70s that it's kind of like, for me, neutral territory at this point, though I do understand there is traditional use and that there's some very interesting and potentially very helpful stuff there. But how do you integrate tribal knowledge into Western medicine, or should you even? Like, there's a big question there. Like, I don't know. I kind of don't think so.
I was having these questions at Soltara during ceremony. Actually, I was like, wow, I know nothing about this world. Like obviously know about the psychedelic world, but that there's something I'm like, wow, like I don't live in the jungle. I live in New Jersey and this isn't my day-to-day worldview. Yes, I have like, I guess, like spiritual shamanic worldviews, but not that type of worldview of like, jungle. It's not where I grew up. It's just a much different way of being and living.
Right. And you like to that point, you did spend time apprenticing with Native American Abenaki shaman.
Yeah, not Abenaki. Well, yeah, actually, no, I did. That was for some like medicinal plant stuff, and then
Okay.
my main, the person that I spent time with, Lakota and Cherokee tradition.
So you've got this really interesting background and connection to those paths and this clinical background too.
Hmm.
So you're trying to figure out how to walk in two realms,
Yep.
which isn't easy.
No.
But that's a problem a lot of us have. Like you love going and doing your ceremonies or jam band psychedelic stuff, and then you have to go be a corporate lawyer or whatever it is and like be undercover. I lived that shit for a long time. I didn't like it. I don't know if I told you this, but my blood pressure is finally like good for the first time in many years.
Wow.
After losing my job, which is fucking amazing. It's like, oh, okay.
Job is stressful.
Code switching. Oh man, code switching constantly, having to hide everything. It's crazy. Not having to hide, not necessarily having shame around it is amazing.
Mm.
Yeah, it's fucking cool. So, I'm not saying quit your job, people. I'm just giving you an example of what happened for me. We're kind of coming up on time, but let's chat about self-care real quick in this kind of insane moment in history. People are losing it. People are just sitting there watching TV going, I don't know what's safe. Like I'm feeling really uncomfortable about my future. Kind of circling back to all that trauma stuff.
Yeah.
Like, is money going to be all right? Am I going to have to lose my apartment? Getting rehomed is a big deal. Like that's not a non-traumatic event. I think I'm going to be okay. There's a lot of work opportunities here in town, so I'll probably be fine. But there's a lot of people that might not be fine.
Scary for a lot of folks. I mean, going back to that idea of trauma, like just losing everything. How is that not traumatic of losing your job and then having to maybe like give up your home? I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully landlords understand what the hell is going on, but you never know.
I think there's going to be a lot of landlords kicking people out. They're just not going to be sympathetic. I don't trust that my landlord wouldn't kick me out. So, yeah, it's tricky. So, with all of this uncertainty looming, like how can you think of any tools you might recommend for people to check out to like kind of help them regulate or get calm or anything like that?
Yeah, trying to just reflect on things that I've been doing. Just really trying to stay in the present moment, limiting maybe your news consumption. I know I try to just limit it to like 1 or 2 times a day. I want to stay informed. I want to know what's going on around my area because, cases are increasing. I just want to kind of know what's going on, but not getting lost down these rabbit holes. So, I usually just try to check things and then try to put it away and not ruminate on it. And then also, thinking about just safety, basic safety precautions. For me, it's just like trying to remember to wipe things down. And that just helps ease my anxiety of like, oh, like, is this contaminated? Let me just like wipe things down. And, some of the basic safety stuff can just be really helpful for, eliminating just those ruminative thoughts of like, oh, what if this is like, what if the virus is in the house or what if I touch this? Like, just, some of those basic things. And then other than that, reading. I've been trying to get off the computer a little bit more. As I mentioned, I feel like a lot of us are just really sucked to the computer. Just trying to spend more time with some books has been really helpful. Just limiting screen time. As I said, I've been fortunate enough to get out and just walk around my neighborhood. I know maybe that's not, people can't do that, but I feel fortunate enough to do that. And breath work, meditation for me has been really helpful, just to kind of ground in the present moment. And something else that has been coming up is like just developing a little bit more of a spiritual practice here and there, through meditation, yoga. There is something about like having a little bit of faith during when the world is uncertain, just to try to strengthen that a little bit more has been really helpful for me. And for me, I bring this up pretty often, just kind of reflecting on death and what does that mean and how do I want to show up day to day, what's really important, and just really trying to stay present with those things has been just really grounding to me. So, yeah, everybody's self-care is going to look different. But, I really just encourage you to find things that you can get lost in. And I'm not talking about getting lost in your phone or Netflix, but maybe try to start developing some new habits. Like I just was outside gardening for the past 2 days. Well, not gardening yet, but tearing up a new plot. And like, I just got
It
so
counts.
lost. Yeah, I got so lost in it. I was like, I just want to get this thing done. Like, this is fun. I'm getting exercise, kind of being outside in the dirt, just trying to find new things. Been trying to cook more, was trying to get into baking. It's like, things that maybe we find stressful. It's like, well, how can we do this and maybe find a little bit more joy in it and be a little bit more present in each moment? So those are the things that have been really helpful for me. I don't know, anything that you've been doing to stay grounded and taking care of yourself?
Probably the most major improvement I made was to like drink only 2 cups of coffee a day. I'm the kind of guy that's like a pretty big stimulant guy. I like it. And it isn't always the best for me. So yeah, just figuring out how to slow down that way. At the same time as I think I got COVID, I got a back injury. So I wasn't really sleeping. So it was really fucked me up. So I'm like, okay, like I could sort this out with stimulants and coffee, or like maybe I just need to slow it down a little bit here for a minute. Same way if I broke my leg, I'd need to slow down for a minute. So that's, trying to deliberately slow down, trying to, at as much as possible, not multitask. Like I'm making all sorts of little individual post-its with individual tasks. So it's like, this is the task I'm on right now. Like you and I have a lot of work to do and it's kind of stressful. It's like, are we working enough? Like it's really uncertain. The answer is probably yes, you're working enough if you're working, but don't push yourself too hard. I had to like back off a few times where I'm like working till what felt like midnight. And I'm like, I should probably not the best. I should probably just go to sleep and, try to get as much sleep as I can get right now to feel better.
That's a
Sleep is
huge
a regulatory thing.
Yeah, getting your sleep and getting good sleep hygiene is super important for self-care.
Our buddy's CBD company from Vermont, like, has been really helpful for me. I hope a sponsorship comes through eventually, but I've been using a lot of his CBD and I really like it. It's really helped me sleep. It really helped with my back pain. Like, I don't know what it was. It was like a muscle pull or something weird. And it was like, couldn't use a pillow, like had to only lay like flat on my back, like I'm in a coffin. Like, this is ridiculous. And I didn't even have a major traumatic event. I usually get a major traumatic event, but maybe I'm okay with that. I don't need another one.
Yeah.
Anytime soon. But yeah, what else? Spending time with books has been really nice. You and I are in this John Cobb class. Like, we're kind of like a little underwater, I think. Like, we're trying to take this class on Process and Reality, which is like one of Alfred North Whitehead's most impenetrable tomes, and getting taught online by one of the leading Whitehead scholars in the world how to work through that book. And, it's been nice to like work with Lenny on Plato and Socrates and ancient Greeks before them. And that's been really cool. I started realizing just like a couple days ago and like feeling it. I was like, I'm really lucky. Like, I can't imagine what happens for people who like don't have this kind of stuff going for them. Like, it's got to be really horrible if you don't have like a lot of stuff going for you. But there are things you can do. Like, try not to eat shitty food, try to get sleep, try to get enough water, like kind of, Maslow it, start with like a decent foundation and then kind of work your way up. Like, I was talking to somebody the other day, like, hey, why don't you try like these 2 things? She's like, that's the last thing I want, is more things to do in my day right now. I'm so freaked out about the world situation that what do I really do here?
It's tough. Yeah. I always come back to like that GPA idea, grounding. So, I mean, how do we just, if you're highly anxious and you're ungrounded right now because of everything that's going on, drink lots of water, try to change up your diet, eat healthy foods, maybe some grounding foods here and there, get your sleep in check, develop a good sleep routine, and just really do things that ground you. And then,
what do grounding foods look like?
I always think of like potatoes and root vegetables and stuff like that. Sometimes
Mhm.
grounding can be meat. I know a lot of people cut meat out, but sometimes meat can be really grounding for folks. I'm not a dietitian or anything like that or nutritionist,
Right.
but I'm just thinking about how we approached this when I was at Soteria and working with trying to working with a naturopath with nutrition. So that some of the things that we focused on were like, meat could be really important to just like get a little bit grounded. A lot of root vegetables, really important for organic meats, and dairy can be really important because of all the chemicals that get stored in the fats. And those were the things that we really looked at. Where if you're going to do anything organic, at least dairy and meat, and this was by information by the naturopath that worked there with us. And then yeah, just lots of veggies and things that are healthy, right? And maybe cut out processed food, sugar, stuff like that. And then yeah, and if your mental health is really starting to kind of go all over the place, I know for myself, we all have our up days and down days. Some days I wake up anxious thinking about something, and then other days I'm like, all right, I'm just kind of staying present in the moment. I got things to focus on. I can get through this. But, if you can reach out to friends, family, find supports, maybe peer support, a coach, maybe, if you have access to a therapist, it might be really important to find a therapist. A lot of therapists are doing telehealth now. So really easy to kind of try to tune into that. But I think it's a really important time to take care of your body and your mental health right now, just to kind of get through everything that's going on, because it is stressful and it's impacting people in such different ways. People maybe losing loved ones, unemployment, just fearing about the economy in general, disrupting routine is just really dysregulating at times. So, yeah, just really kind of focusing on some of this basic physical self care, and then thinking about, yeah, how can we, maybe do some processing, find somebody to chat with, because, it's easy to just kind of keep everything inside, and that really exacerbates things here and there. And yeah, like I said, like some of my self care is like with breath work and meditation, a lot of kind of somatic stuff, stretching, taking deep breaths into places that are tense, exploring those sensations, and just kind of like working with that in different ways can just help. Like we did a webinar with Micah, and I was going through kind of like that somatic practice, and I was just even realizing like how tight my chest is during all this stuff at times, and just even throwing my arms back, really kind of stretching the chest out, raising them up above my head, leaning back a little bit, breathing. If you want like a technique for that, just look at like any work by Alexander Lowen or Reich. They would kind of talk about this character armoring and really opening up the chest, breathing into it, letting the jaw hang open, working with kind of like that frontal fascia that, because we're all kind of tense right now. We're probably, I mean, even if you're listening to this, just maybe notice your posture. Are you hunched over right now? Are you sitting up straight? How are your shoulders? I know this whole time I've been kind of hunched over. So, maybe just even take a moment to drop your shoulders, maybe lift your head up. You're not, well, yeah, you can lift your head up, but lift your arms above your head, maybe stretch back a little bit, and just notice what that might feel like around the chest area. Um, Anxiety does restrict breathing. And so, how can we open that up?
There's a story in a Grof book. I forget what it was about somebody in a spiritual emergency type situation. And like they were kind of on a manic streak and not really eating, running around. And I think this lasted a number of days. And, eventually people have to go back to real life outside of Esalen. So they were trying to come up with interventions, and they fed the person meatloaf. And the person just like came right down. So it's like, if you're like wildly amplified, like hopefully you haven't been using psychedelics during this crisis at like high levels. I'm not really a fan like of that, but if you did and you're amplified and you're feeling really ungrounded, perhaps like a sugary drink, like Snickers, like meatloaf, perhaps those kinds of things can bring you down. Body chemistry changes impact psychic state.
Mm-hmm.
So very worth considering all that stuff. And yeah, So to be careful right now, like we're in a crisis. There are barely any hospital beds anywhere. If you're doing something that might take up a hospital bed, you might consider to not do that for a few more months till we're past peak and there's hospital beds available. Because if you're taking up a hospital bed, that means that somebody else might not be able to have that bed and they might die. People are dying in waiting rooms, trigger warning, scary times, but people are dying in really horrible ways right now. And if you're tripping and you need medical attention for whatever reason, maybe you stepped on broken glass. I don't know. Maybe you had a manic thing and you needed to get taken down with Thorazine, which would suck, but if they even use Thorazine anymore, but it's potentially unethical to put your body and mind in a state where you need attention, because right now we don't have enough medical personnel, equipment, facilities, all that. So just that's my word of caution. If you're going to be doing this stuff, like consider not doing it. If you're going to do it, consider taking way less than you might normally take. Lower dose, lower risk most of the time.
I was even thinking about that yesterday. I was trying to pull roots out of the ground. I was like, maybe I should find a new way to do this so I don't pull my back out and have to like go to the hospital or something like that. So just even like paying attention to what you're doing, I was like, I don't know if I want to hurt myself doing this right now.
Yeah. And just, perhaps just pay slightly more attention than you normally did. You've got more free time. You're probably not spending as much money as you were. Perhaps, take that kind of Eckhart Tolle approach of like, what does it really feel like to brush your teeth? What does it really feel like to swallow water or walk?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff you can do for $0 right now that takes minimal effort, attention to check out. Qigong exercises are pretty incredible. Like it's very easy to learn this stuff on YouTube. And it was one of my main keys during my wonder years where everything was going swimmingly well for a while. Qigong. Check it out. Maybe you love it. Maybe yoga's for you. Maybe Qigong's for you. Maybe it's Tai Chi. I don't know. Like you got to try things. If everybody had really like simple answers and people weren't all that different, we could give you a really strict formula of what to do. But people are very different.
Yeah. I want to make a comment too about like those who are doing a lot of online work. Yeah. Taking time to move, to stretch, to not overdo it. I don't know how you've been. Well, yeah, I guess you mentioned you feel like you've been working a lot. But yeah, it's so easy to just sit around and try to do all this work all the time. And, I've definitely seen a lot of narratives out there from, different influencers and different articles saying like, now's the time to like start this new project and now's the time to like double down. And if you're not doing anything, you're just being lazy. And I mean, no, give yourself permission to be with whatever's coming up. There's a lot of like anxiety and fear going on out there, and it's okay to not want to, start a new project and try to use this time, as like potential business time to try to do everything. Really take care of yourself. That's really important because I feel like, with all this extra time, I've said, oh, it's a really great time to go inside and try to start new things. But for some people, maybe that's actually really stressful. You take on too much and you're trying to do too many things. Like I think this was like the first week I started to like slow down a little bit, and I realized I was working almost every day for the past like 2.5, 3 weeks. Like I was working on the weekends doing stuff, and I was like, man, I really need to just go outside and work in the garden a little bit. Even though like I'm trying to get this shadow thing out and I really want to get that up, I was like, I have to step away from it just for a tiny bit, because I could just sit here on the computer doing emails all day or trying to do this and try to do that and just try to interact with people. People are constantly like trying to reach out and scheduling phone calls, and I'm just like, I need to take care of myself right now. And so it's okay not to be as productive as, maybe other people are saying, oh, it's a really great time to be productive, to give yourself permission to just be in the moment. It's really important for your health.
Yeah. It's like, what's an analogy? Like you're pretty regularly getting beaten at home and you're like, oh, like I'm just thinking an analogy for a traumatic thing. And then you're like, oh, might as well take this opportunity to get a lot of work done. It's like, Like, I don't know. Like, this trauma is still actively happening to you and looming over you. Is it really the best time to just get a lot of work done? Maybe, maybe not. You got to look at your own mental state, mind body state, maybe.
Yeah, like how productive can you be when you're like, just constantly triggered? Like, is it going to be great work? Like, I notice sometimes I'm like trying to write things, my mind is just so scattered. I'm like, I don't know if I can do this right now, actually.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's good for now. Any closing thoughts before we shout out sponsors?
No, just I hope everybody is staying safe, staying well, and taking care of yourself.
Yeah, please, please, please wash your hands. Any mask is better than no mask. So, just be careful out there. It's a minefield. I thankfully survived the disease, I think. So, maybe you can too. Hopefully you can too. But yeah, the more careful you can be, the better around this. And it's not just for you and your family, it's for everybody. So, we're all in it together. How psychedelic is this moment?
Yeah, it's very psychedelic.
Yeah. So a few words before we wrap. So again, May 7, we kick off Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. The US version is almost sold out. If you're in the US, you can still join the 2 p.m. It's 2 p.m. Eastern class on Thursdays as well.
Yep.
7 p.m. London time. You can still join that one. We'd love to have you. And yeah, people have been giving us rave reviews. You also get a copy of each of our books, the Trip Journal and Integration Workbook, along with the sign up. We'll mail that out as soon as we can. Yeah, just really excited for another edition of it. The last edition was really fulfilling. And you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And also got free classes up there. We've got a cheaper version of Navigating Psychedelics, currently priced at $127. So if the clinician's course isn't for you and you want to just get the ball rolling on your education, check that one out. And I think that's it on the education front. So again, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. On it, onnit.com. Great supplements and food. Use the code PSY today at checkout, 10% off your order. Everything but fitness equipment. And for Audible, audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. And you can get a free book and a free month trial. No risk to you financially. So definitely check it out. At least get yourself one free book. Again, the Mike J book on mescaline's extraordinary. There's a bunch of Tim Leary books. There's a book on the history of drugs called Drugged by Richard Miller. It's extraordinary. I've listened to it maybe 3 times now. All sorts of amazing stuff up there. So get yourself a book. At the very least, lay down, close your eyes, and listen to an audiobook. I promise it's worthwhile. And again, audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. And anything else, Kyle?
Nope, I think that's it. You actually cut out a whole bunch, so I think I missed some stuff, but that's okay.
Yeah, no worries. Internet and Zoom time. So yeah, I guess until the next episode, this is Joe Moore, Kyle Buller signing off. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.